Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I am your host, Randi-lee. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking to Paint a Fremmerlid, and just going to throw a warning at the beginning. We do talk about some sensitive topics, including suicide. Welcome, Paint. So excited to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
So I am an artist and a poet. I've done spoken word poetry. I recently published a tarot deck, the Platella Tarot, that I've been working on for the last year during the pandemic. And I also have 2 poetry books that I've published that are out still, Heavy Backpack and Strengthening Snowflakes.
Very cool. So that's like what you do, but who are you?
Okay. So I'm like a queer, non-binary, transgender, neurodivergent witch.
You sound like my kid right now. Oh, seriously, if you asked him, that'd pretty much be very close to his answer.
Well, I'm almost 30, so dreams can come true.
Oh, there you go.
Well, I am 30. I mean, yeah, anyways.
30 was a so-so year. I had cancer when I was 30, so I was so-so, but 31 was really good. I liked 31, 32.
Yeah, I'm really getting amped for 31, so.
Yeah. Some people have never heard the word neurodivergent before. So first, explain to everybody what it is that you mean by that.
Okay, so neurodivergent is just kind of like, there's sort of like measures of how people are typically expected to function in society and how our brains react to the world around us. And so there's sort of this like neurotypical way of perceiving and receiving information in the world and how we interact with it. And so people who are neurodivergent, which includes people who are, it was primarily from the autism community that word is coined. But it can extend out to include people who are ADHD, people who have mental illness. Those can all be kind of included in that umbrella of experiencing the world in a way that is different than what is sort of primarily expected of us.
That is a great explanation. I'm always trying to think of the best ways to explain that word, because in my second book that I released, I co-authored with my best friend, and we used that term to explain our kids. And people at that time, this was a few years ago, and we were like the first people in our area anyways that were using that word. Mm-hmm. And people would look at us, go, what the heck do you mean? And we'd have to explain it. So it's so nice when I meet guests, because you're not the first one to use that word, and I love it.
Yeah, well, I really like it because it's a demedicalized term, and it's something that originated from within the disability community itself.
Yeah.
Right.
And I like it because it doesn't mean that you're less than, it means that you're different from.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's just a totally different perspective. And then another term that you used that I think a lot of people don't know is non-binary. I remember when I first heard it, funny story. Okay, so when I first heard it was my oldest kid that said it, and she was coming out, and I was like, okay. And she goes, I have something really important to tell you. Okay. And she's like, I don't know if I can tell you. Okay, like get on with it. Come on. And so she goes to her room and she texts me. I'm non-binary. I had never heard this word before. This gender fluidity was very new concept to me. It wasn't something I had heard of before. So I was thinking non-binary. I was like, you're a computer? Like,
oh no.
Like the binary code.
Oh,
like,
no.
I don't know. I had no idea. This is going back now. Oh my goodness, she's in grade 12. So I guess going back 4 years now. It's been a while, but I was like, like, I had no idea that was a term. So I had to look it up, and then I noticed, oh my goodness, there's a lot of terms. But explain to everybody else who is in the same position I was, thinking binary code is something related. It's not, guys. It's not.
Yeah, so like we've been socially conditioned by our society to think of ourselves as having like 2 distinct genders or 2 distinct sexes. when that's not really the reality. I see gender more as like a dance and a way that we communicate and a way that we like express ourselves to each other and a way which we experience ourselves. And so for me, non-binary is it can be both like an umbrella term or an individual identifier of having a unique experience of gender that doesn't fit those traditional roles of strictly masculine or feminine, male or female. It's somewhere in between, outside, nowhere, out the window. Like it could be all kinds of places, but it's a just a different way of defining that experience outside of male and female.
That again, another great definition of it. There's a lot of different terms to describe gender now, which I'm coming to learn over the last few years, and I'm still working on it, still learning the intricacies of it all. I mean, life is all
Mhm,
about learning, and
mhm,
the only problem is when we stop trying to learn, then you
mhm.
put yourself in a rut. As long as you're trying to learn, then it's all good.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, all right. And one last question about some terms that you use, because you're actually, so I've heard people call themselves queer before, but growing up, that was a derogatory term. It was, that was something you didn't say to people. It meant that you were being really mean to them.
Mhm,
So this, I mean, I've heard it a little bit now that I've been doing some research since my kids said they were non-binary, but I still don't fully grasp people using this term. Because like I said, I grew up and that was like a no-no. So
yeah,
can
so
you,
like it's definitely more of it becomes more of a political statement when you are reclaiming it, because you're right, it does have a history as a slur. And I remember like really feeling like I didn't even have a right to use that word because I felt like I hadn't gone through enough life experience. But there's a certain point where um to me, I felt like I had reached that threshold of like, oh my goodness, like I am queer because I have gone through all of these difficult things. And I'm going to take that word and I'm not going to let that word have power over me. And so, it's the same as any kind of reclaimed slur, right? Like people use it, like there's different like um it's okay for it's different than other reclaimed slurs because every reclaimed slur has its own nuances and to
yeah,
that
yeah.
community that
Yeah, we
obviously I
don't we
can't
don't
get.
need to get into all those because I don't
Yeah,
we, we don't want
there's a
to
lot
upset
there to
anybody.
unpack.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
for queer, it's kind of like people who identify underneath that term, that term applies to them and only them. And so like you don't apply that term to the entire LGBT community. You apply that term only to people who have like reclaimed, like specifically stated and reclaimed that term and said that whether or not it's okay for people to use it, there's still some people who like parts of it to be censored. There are different levels of comfort and feelings around that term. um there are younger people who are just embracing the term and maybe haven't had to have all those negative experiences with it too. And then there's like disagreement among other people about whether or not the younger people should even be using the word, but it's like it's our word, like we've taken that and we've made a world where it's safe for them to use that. So like I think that's good, I think that's beautiful
Okay.
if people want to reclaim that word and make it their own. And like the first time I heard queer used in um a negative sense was with this older lady that I worked with at the time, and she was talking about oranges that had gone off, like they had gone rotten.
Okay.
And she says, "Oh, I think the oranges are a little queer." And I just remember being so like thrown for a loop by that because I've never had queer used as a derogatory word towards me. I don't think, not any way that's like registered in my consciousness.
Okay. Yeah.
But that use of the word queer really threw me off because it's like you're saying that that word is is rotten, is gone bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Very interesting.
mhm.
All right. And this is the perfect segue then, because you brought up experiences that you went through. Well, let's talk about some some of those. I'm sure a lot of them relate back to your mental health. So I'm just going to shift this over there.
Yeah. So in terms of my mental health, I guess there are kind of like a couple of key things that happened. I had a psychosis in my early 20s. And I think that that was a combination of the undiagnosed autism, a lot of gender stuff going on, and just like the way I had been kind of like really programmed to fit into reality just wasn't operating. And I like realized that I was perfect in the sense that I had like achieved this kind of social perfection for other people, but it wasn't who I was, and it felt empty. And I just kind of like fell off this cliff because I had nothing in the world for me to like kind of grasp onto to say this is who I am, and ground myself in myself. And I was also on like the wrong types of medications because I didn't have the right diagnoses. And um I believe in like epigenetic triggers.
Okay.
And so I believe that having a psychotic episode, and this is from kind of like skimming, like I'm not a scientist, right? But this is from skimming and my own kind of self-research. I believe that having that psychotic episode probably triggered a predisposition to bipolar and to mania. And so
Okay.
now I have to remain for the rest of my life continuously vigilant to keep myself in kind of a steady state of mind, right? And so I believe that prior to that, I was, autistic and ADHD, and then trying to cope with that without support, without diagnosis, and without a framework triggered a psychosis, which set off the epigenetic trigger for bipolar. And I do have a lot of childhood trauma because it's impossible to not have, it's almost impossible to not have trauma when you're a neurodivergent person. And then when I was a couple more years into my journey and I had started to really embrace and explore these different aspects of my identity, I was traumatized again by a sexual assault, and developed like full-on PTSD and lost my ability to write.
Ooh. And when you're a writer, I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
When you lose the ability to do something that you love, that's like a part of who you are, that's so horrible. Like,
Yeah.
cutting off your arm, like you just
it really was. It's like and like people think that like writing is just typing words on a page, but it's so much more than that, because there is this process that is going on in the back of your mind where you are crafting a universe, or you are creating a world, and you are communicating an intention, a story, an ideal. There is something beyond like, this paragraph. You're trying to communicate something that transcends the entire story through your story.
yes.
And so I would still be able to like write these like really long posts about how mad I was that I couldn't write. And so like I think it like didn't click for people what I was going through, because I would be like, I can't write, and I could write about like this long about how I
It's
can't
not the
write.
same.
Right, exactly. And so I ended up doing a lot of spoken word for a period of time, got involved in the local spoken word scene, and that's how I ended up like doing my poetry books.
Okay.
Was because that was kind of my fallback. It was like, well, at least I can do poetry.
Yeah.
Right. And I can write about things that happen to me, and I can write about like nonfiction, and I can write about the things that I believe in. Right. But it was still like really haunting me, because I was working on a novel that that was a way of processing my psychosis, of all things. Right. It's because it was like a 2-year gap between my psychosis and my assault. So in that period, I had like synthesized a story idea to kind of communicate what my pain that led to my psychosis was. Because it's like, I understand why I had my psychosis. I understand where that came from within me. And like the story that I write, it has nothing to do with what I actually experienced during my psychosis, but it is a metaphor that explains the
Okay.
circumstances that created that event.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think I'm following. I think so.
Yeah, because
And if people aren't, then they can ask questions down below and we'll get you back on and answer the questions.
Yeah, so
There we
like the
go. Keep
story
the
the story was
conversation.
about gender, right? The story
Yeah.
was about gender and a world that was divided by gender, and how people respond to trauma. And
Okay.
so there was a lot of different things going on there. And even now I look back and I didn't even know what I was writing about in
Yeah.
that story. You know, like you look back and you're like, wow. But it's been almost like 10 years since my psychosis and since I was writing.
Oh yeah, I guess so, because we we're talking about 30.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't know. I had to completely let go though of whether or not I was going to finish that specific story in that specific form, because otherwise I just was torturing myself with the question and I wasn't able to heal.
Yeah,
Right.
that makes sense. Now I'm curious, have you went back and finished that story?
Well, I have like ideas
Okay.
about what I might do. Like I might try to do it in like a different format. Like I might try to turn it into a game or a show. Like, you know, like I
Okay.
actually pitched it as a show. Didn't
Oh,
go
okay.
through. It was rejected. But you know, I tried.
Yeah, that's all that you can do.
Yeah, so it's not gone, right? I'm not pushing myself, you know.
Yeah.
I'm trusting that I need to do a lot of work before I can 100% go back to that.
Yeah. I was just being nosy. And I'm gonna be some more nosy right now. So, okay, you talked about the psychosis when you're in your 20s. What Take us back a few years before that and like what was leading up to it, because you were saying that you didn't have the correct diagnosis at the time. So
Mhm.
what did they say that you had?
So at that time I was strictly diagnosed with ADHD.
I had a feeling that was going to be
Yeah.
your answer.
And so like part of why I had the psychosis was a bad reaction to ADHD meds, because I should not have been on ADHD meds by themselves, because they didn't actually fully address the kind of,
Mhm.
you know, complexity of symptoms I was having.
Yeah, that seems to happen a lot. I mean, again, I can only speak from experience. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a researcher,
Mhm.
but from my experiences just with like my kid, ADHD was like the thing they push and try these ADHD meds. And I'm like, okay, well, these didn't work. Oh, well, let's just try a different kind. I'm like, but we know they don't work. But we'll try a different kind of the same thing. And guess what? They didn't work. So it can be very frustrating. But I do understand from the medical side. I mean, there's so many different kinds of medications too that sometimes it does take time and trial and error to find something that would work.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so they said that you had ADHD and then you had kind of a psychosis. What did it feel like when you were in the psychosis?
So being on a psychosis, I honestly thought that my brain had created its own drugs and that I was high and that I was having an out of body experience, and I didn't think I was in reality. I
Oh,
was moving through reality, but I did not
yeah.
think I was in reality. I thought I was in like another realm on top of ours.
Okay. How long did it last?
So like the acute portion, like it's probably built up over the course of like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I was in the hospital for 7 weeks.
Oh, dang.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So when did the new diagnosis come, the correct diagnosis? How long?
So I was put in one hospital, and this one was not a good fit for me, the hospital itself or the doctors. The nurses were terrible. They said awful things about me, to me, made assumptions, didn't ask me questions. There was just a really difficulty in communicating.
Okay.
And it was just a terrible experience. And so I was there for about 3 weeks, and they didn't know what was wrong with me. They just said like stress on the brain, and they were refusing to give a diagnosis. And like looking back on it now, though, I think that was the most accurate diagnosis at that time. Is just like my brain was just so stressed out that it just
Yeah.
like exploded. Um, and then I was transferred to a different hospital where I saw my original doctor who was treating me for ADHD. And he's like, well, you have bipolar. We're going to put you on bipolar meds. And even now, though, like the bipolar aspect is somewhat debatable. Doctors don't have a consensus. Like my own, like the different doctors I've talked to, there is not a specific consensus about this aspect. And that's kind of like, it could be frustrating, but I've like kind of like made my peace with that, because like I understand what happened in that situation internally, and to me the label doesn't matter so much. Like they can disagree or label that however they want, as long as I understand myself and my brain and what's happening. That's what's important to me.
And I think a really important point for people to understand is that mental health it's subjective, right? Because the doctor can't just do a test and go, oh yeah, your blood work here says you're bipolar. That's not the way it is. So when you go into an appointment and they ask you, you know, XYZ, and you give them answers, then you go into the next appointment, but maybe you're in a down mode, or maybe you're in an up mode at that time. Then you go in and your answers can be different to the next doctor because your mood has switched. Well, so Dr. A doesn't see what Dr. B sees. And that's a really hard part, of mental health. And I know taking my kid to different doctor's appointments over the years, that's been a struggle, where it's like, no, seriously, I'm not lying about the meltdowns. It's just you're not seeing it right now.
Yeah, it's and for me, like I I had a lot of there's a lot of times people with autism are misdiagnosed with bipolar.
Yeah.
Because doctors only do see that like snapshot, right? And they're like, they put it in that box of, well, if you weren't diagnosed as autistic when you were a child, then I'm going to pretend that that's not even a possibility, that you're an undiagnosed autistic person. Like, we're just going to pretend that's not possible. And I see what you're doing right now, and it's kind of this like weird eccentric behavior. So that must be mania. That must be hypomania. And so for me, like the measure, it became more about like, I realized that to go see my psychiatrist, because like, unfortunately for me as a transgender person, my mental health care was tying into my gender affirming care. And so it's like, well, you can't get gender affirming care unless you can prove that you're mentally stable. And then it's like, but then is my priority to be mentally stable or to appear mentally stable to get gender affirming care? And like the gender affirming care would help me be more mentally stable. So it becomes
interconnected.
It is horrible. It is a horrible thing to navigate. It is a horrible experience. I do not recommend it. People don't do this for fun. There is no fun. They have made it like absolutely no fun. And so if I want to wear clothes that make me feel comfortable and happy and joyous because I'm not having a good time, like I'm gonna do that. And so for me, like my gender expression is very fluid and is all over the place, and like has always been that way. Like, even though I primarily use like he, him pronouns, and like I still accept they, like they is okay. I love they. I'll wear frilly skirts, and I love dresses because I hate pants. And like a lot of that has to do with like the autism side of things too, because it's like a sensory experience of like, I hate the way pants feel on my body. Dresses feel more comfortable. I feel so much more comfortable in dresses.
Oh my goodness. It's like I'm talking to my kid as an adult, because that is the same thing. So he goes by he, him. Born female, goes by he, him, but still wears dresses because dresses are more comfortable because pants are not.
Yeah, no, pants are horrible. And
oh my goodness, it's just so funny because it's a conversation I have regularly with him.
No, it's totally legit. It's totally a thing, and I'm glad that you sound like you're a pretty supportive parent. So that's awesome. I'm glad that
Well,
they have you.
as
That
he likes
that he
to
has
say,
you.
yeah, as he likes to say, I, and sorry for anybody that this is not how they want to hear it, but I pooped him out. So, I mean, I went through all that. I might as well keep loving him. Like,
Yeah, yeah, he's yours for sure.
I personally, and I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I just don't understand parents that all of a sudden stop loving their kid because they're not what they thought they were. That's, I don't know, it boggles my mind. That's a whole rabbit hole that we don't need to go down right now.
Yeah,
But
no.
my message to any parent out there is you've already pooped them out. You might as well keep loving them.
That's, that's not a bad mantra.
And I mean, he's hilarious. He's an artist too, just like you. Like I said, it's like a spitting image. It's very strange.
Okay, wonderful. Okay,
Yes,
cool.
yeah.
That's so neat.
Yeah. Later, I'll have to send you his website. You can see his stuff.
Okay, cool, cool. That sounds
Yeah.
great.
So after you got out of the hospital and you're kind of dealing with this gender identity thing and this bipolar thing that they're saying you have, when did the autism diagnosis make it into the mix?
So that's actually like a really weird story.
Or like weird.
Because so my I have a brother who is nonverbal,
Older or
and
younger? I'm just being nosy.
just a tiny bit older. Just a tiny bit older.
I'm just nosy.
Yeah. So I have a brother who is nonverbal, and so there was a lot of problems in my family growing up, and my brother wasn't treated very kindly, in my opinion. And also, like, as a professional, because I did end up going and studying disability studies and working in the field of human rights for disability people, for disability studies, and for working in human rights for disabled people. And so I know as a professional that the way my brother was treated as a child was unfair and abusive. And by our society standards, especially at that time, it was not seen that way.
Yeah, things have changed a lot over the years. I mean, we have a long way to go, but it's a lot different than it was.
Yeah. And so in terms of me seeing myself as autistic, it's really funny, and like understanding that I am autistic, because it's like my mom had all the books about autism. So like I read all of them when I was 9 years old, like all of her books by Temple Grandin. And my friend pointed out, like, that would really help someone who was autistic learn how to mask their symptoms. Because like, why did I read all of the books on autism that were available to me so that I could manage? Like, I was young, I didn't know what I was doing. But at the same time, I was watching my brother be abused. And so what was I internalizing from that, right? And I was internalizing some very, like, it is not safe to be autistic, and it's wrong to be autistic.
Yeah.
Right. And so those are some very strong internal messages. But especially post psychosis, it became harder and harder, because like essentially, like and this is common, I think, with people who are autistic and go undiagnosed and unsupported and mask their symptoms and mask, like, who they really are from the world, because they're trying to build up this image and present in a specific way, and like hide how they actually feel and how they actually experience the world. Psychosis and bipolar and all of these things, like, I think that's an incredibly common reaction. And there are like I have talked to a lot of people who have had mental breakdowns because of that, right?
Yeah.
And so coming out of that mental breakdown, I could not hide that I was this like really bizarre person. I didn't know like who I was. I just, it was like I started to figure out what that meant, and I had to go off of medication for a little while, because I was just like it shut me down too much to think clearly.
Okay.
And so I was like, I didn't have a supportive doctor that I felt like I could talk to. So I made that conscious decision, and I did it in a way where I tapered my doses, and I did it like safely. And I would not recommend, like, ideally people have supportive doctors that they can go through these types of processes with. But unfortunately, that's not always the reality. And I do believe that people do have the utmost authority on themselves, generally speaking.
And I mean, there's always second opinions out there if you live in an area that's possible.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But unfortunately, like connecting the dots between all the different doctors, getting the right opinions, like it can be really hard. It can be super hard to navigate. So like sometimes we make choices, sometimes they're wrong. That was an okay choice in my case. Luckily for me to go off of my medications. And I had like, first it started with like, that's what kind of led me down the, like, as soon as I was off my medications and I could like think clearly, that's when I started to realize like the queerness and the gender stuff and the sexuality things. And so I really started going into that pathway. And then I moved in with someone that I thought was like a safe person, and more of my autism was coming through, and more of my disability, because I was being more myself and trying to live in a way that accommodated my disability, even though I didn't know what my disability was. And that's where I was assaulted and ultimately abused. And so it's like I exposed, you know, my disability for the first time in my life. I exposed my transness for the first time in my life. And I had a near-death experience.
Oh, it was like that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And then I ended up like escaping that situation and working kind of like a minimum wage job. And like I lost my career because I lost all of my confidence. So I lost my ability to write. I lost my career. Like everything was just like boom down. And like and like the depression that I went through was so devastating.
And how old were you at this time?
At this point, I would be like 24, 25, 26. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm
just keeping a timeline in my head.
Yeah. At the same time though, like this is when I'm starting to go to poetry, and people are seeing this like really loud, bright, creative self, and people don't know.
No,
like,
this is
how
not,
depressed I am.
I'm going to say something, and this is not meant in a mean way at all, but people are starting to see these weirdo, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I call myself a weirdo all the time. I just had a conversation with my husband last night. He likes to say when I start talking, he goes, "Oh, we're on the roller coaster." And he goes, "There we are, up and down. Yep, we're on the Randy roller coaster."
Yeah, no, people had no idea who I was, what I was doing, what my deal was. I wasn't articulating myself well. Like, you know, I still like I don't know what fully happened to my own body, like in my own assault. Like I don't know like what like the impacts were, but like my therapist was like, well, you know, it doesn't matter if you like speculate about whether or not you had a specific type of brain injury, because trauma is an injury. So it doesn't matter. Like, I've had doctors tell me that I'm fine, but like there's still like this like feeling of like something's wrong with me. Like I feel like something's wrong with me. And I was just acting like a weirdo. And people don't like weirdos. And so I ended up being the target of a hate campaign online, and people were calling me autistic.
Oh. So, okay, hold on. I just want to get this all straight. So you had no diagnosis at this time for autism.
Yeah.
Right? So you had your psychosis, ADHD, and bipolar at this point. And so you were doing your poetry thing, being your cool, weird self, and people just didn't like it. So they made fun of you by calling you autistic.
Yeah, sort of. So like the poetry scene itself was very supportive. But outside of the poetry scene, like I had issues like sort of like at work, and I had issues like online where like my dating profile went viral. I was made into a hate meme. And there were threads about me where people were speculating, sharing personal information, people that I'd encountered over my life, coming forward, talking about me.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around, first off, the fact that, well, that's just not okay at all. And try not to swear. Try not to drop some F-bombs right now, but really what the F is wrong with people. A lot, obviously. But the other thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is using autism as an insult. Like, it's not a bad thing to be autistic or to have autism. Like, okay, so side note, because this is, Randy roller coaster, as my husband liked to say last night. It was really kind of, it was just so funny how he was describing it, because I was talking about one thing and I'd be like, oh yeah, and then this other thing over here. Oh yeah, this other thing over here. That's okay. I've heard you say I have autism and I am autistic. And I know in the autism community, there's people that say it one way and don't say it the other way. So do you have a preference? Do you care?
I am overcoming the internalized ableism to say I am autistic.
Okay.
Right. So I would say that I am in that process.
Okay.
Right. Because before it was always this question of, do I have autism? Do I have autism? Do I have autism? Because it would not leave me alone. The question itself would not leave me alone. And then having it brought up in such a traumatic way, when I was at like literally the lowest point in my life, like I was suicidal about not being able to write. I had lost my career. I had lost everything in my life. And people were harassing me and making fun of me at this time. And like, this was several years ago, and like, this is mostly dissipated by now. And that's, the past. And I want that to kind of be the past. It was just like, I felt like I couldn't even say whether or not I was autistic, because if I self-diagnosed myself, there's like that stigma attached to it. So I had no right, all of a sudden, I had no right to even ask myself that question, because it had already been taken away from me. And so I knew that in order to claim an autistic identity and to know myself as autistic, I would need to get a diagnosis.
Okay.
Because otherwise I needed that as like ammunition against this kind of like vitriol and hatred. And like, part of the reason why I wasn't diagnosed as autistic was because my family was so focused on my sibling.
Yeah.
Right. Because his symptoms were so much more obvious.
Yeah.
And I was learning how to mask in response to the abuse he was receiving.
Yes.
Right.
Understandably so. You don't want to take that abuse onto yourself.
Yeah. So, and it's so messed up. It's so messed up. But anyway, so like, I had to get a diagnosis, and I had to do that like on my own terms. And so like, I had eventually kind of quietly accepted that I was autistic, and I knew this, just because like, I don't know, at 28, 29, now we're talking, I had, seen enough stuff and been through enough things to kind of put the pieces together. Like, we are the experts on ourselves. And especially when it comes to something like neurodivergence, it's not the same as like saying, oh, I have cancer. Like, you need to get like a, a scan or something to tell you that. Like,
go up in there and take some stuff out.
Yeah. But like something like autism, like how your brain operates, like if you're like, psychoanalyzing how your own brain works compared to other people, is that really normal?
Yeah. I know, sometimes I'll stop, I'll be thinking something, I'll just stop and I'll look at my husband, I go, do you, whatever it is. So like the one day we were reading, and so I stopped because it's always been a thing. So I wondered, so I said, hon, when you're reading a book, do you like see the people and stuff? He goes, yeah. Oh, okay. And I just went back to reading. I don't see people when their faces and stuff. It's not there for me. Right. So I'm just like, okay. Like, I just wanted to know. And then I went back to reading my book with my faceless people.
Yeah. Like, we all have different ways of experiencing the world too. Right. So it is very interesting, but it was just like, it was to the point that it was impeding my ability to like interact and connect with people. So like, obviously there's something there.
Yeah. You needed to find an answer for yourself.
Yeah. And so I ended up having a breakdown because I lost a friend to suicide, and their suicide was probably largely due to that whole mess, because he is also trans, also autistic, also dealing with a lot of the same obstacles that I was dealing with, right? And so in a way, it just We had only become close in like the last 6 months of his life. And he had already tried to take his life several times before then. And I'm really grateful that we became close friends in that time. But it really just tore my heart out, because it's like, this could have been me. Like, just as easily, like a coin toss. In the fates of the universe, like that could just as easily be me, because of we were going through so many of the same things in terms of like you know, having our disabilities be hard to define and hard to diagnose, and all of that stuff, right? And so I just completely, like, I went into like autistic burnout, shutdown. Like, I like could barely move. There was just so much that happened in that period of time. And I had to stop working and take a year off, and I haven't gone back to work since, because I don't know how I can fit myself back into a working structure without causing myself psychological harm. Because I worked when I was like, right after I had a near-death experience, I was working a minimum wage job. Like there was so much trauma from capitalism and from like 10 years of working through extreme mental health distress. That, like,
we have this thing in society where push through. It's better if you just keep going, keep working.
Yeah. And that's just not reality. And like, and this last year, like with COVID, I was incredibly lucky, because the timing worked, that like, as this support ran out, there were like these other supports that appeared here.
That's right.
And so I was able to just not work, and I made a tarot deck, and the tarot deck, I was also working with an arts therapist at the same time. And I was representing trauma theory. And so I was actually telling my story through drawing. And as someone who was robbed of my ability to tell story, suddenly I'm able to do it in drawing.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Right. And so, and then I created that, and then I had to go back and I had to write the guidebooks that reference, you know, and explain kind of like a little bit about all the symbolism. And like, you know, it's not going to be this super polished, amazing thing, but it's like this huge step in my process of healing, that I was able to create this like finished product.
That
is
awesome.
Yeah. And get some writing in there too.
So I just noticed the time. Oh my goodness. I want to keep talking to you, but we've already went way longer than most of the interviews go, but that's okay. I'll have to have you come back, because I'm nosy. I'm inquisitive. There we go. That's a much nicer way to say it. I'm inquisitive. So I have all these other things that I want to ask, but since we've already went longer than most interviews, we're going to start to wrap it up. But I want to know, what would you tell somebody who's listening right now and they're really struggling with their own identity?
Like, find what you define as quiet. Find solitude, and like listen to yourself there. Like that can be anywhere. That can be like a busy street, but like somewhere where you feel safe and where you feel like you can hear yourself. Like for me, that was when I was like driving in my car, right, on an empty street on a sunny day. And that's when it hit me. And you just gotta like let it come to you, because it will. If you give it space, if you don't ask, if you're struggling to know if there's something that you're trying to receive about yourself from yourself, you just have to give space for it to come to you.
That's very profound. I like it. All right. So the other super important stuff that we need to know is where the heck to find what your poetry books and your other products. How do people get their hands on them?
Yeah, so everything I have actually is on linked through paint.gay.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's a little tab called Things. There's the Patella Tarot. There's Lulu Publications, which is where my books are out. I'm actually working on a second draft of Heavy Backpack right now, so that one's not up for sale, but the second one will be soon. And I also have a threadless shop that sells all of the art from the Patella Tarot on all kinds of different things. There's Yeah, and there's also like those by the time this airs for sure there'll be an Etsy shop. The Etsy shop is there, so there's an Etsy shop with gender inclusive swimwear, and
Okay, hold on, hold
I'm
on.
working on fabrics.
What is gender inclusive swimwear? Like, what would that look like?
So for me, it's like I hate swimwear because everything feels like too gendered, and like it's not even that people like people gender swimwear for you. So it's just like having like symbols and things on it that like just are communicated and made with the intent that like this can be worn by like, you know, it doesn't matter what your identity is, you can kind of claim it. And like I made like pronoun bikinis, for
Oh,
example, right? So like if
okay.
someone is like, you know, not able to transition, doesn't want to transition, but they use they, them, or he, him for their pronouns, you can have them right on, right there, right there. So because usually people very much gender tits as female. So if you
Yeah.
want to have, and that's a big problem for me, is because I'm very uncomfortable in a lot of swimwear because you know, when your body is on display, you do get very aggressively gendered by others. So things that subverse that, and also just things that are maybe comfortable, right? So
Okay.
I'm still experimenting
Yeah, yeah.
with what that will look like. I just when
It's
I
just very
saw that,
cool.
I thought when I saw that it was a possibility for me to do, I just got so excited because and it's an area I've struggled with so much.
Yeah, it's a fight every year with my kid about what to wear because identifying as a boy, but I'm sorry, you still need to wear a top.
Yeah, and unfortunately I haven't found any manufacturers linking up with kind of like loose fitting, kind of more typical swim trunks.
Mhm.
So right now, most of the things I have are probably geared towards AFAB bodies,
Mhm.
right? So bodies that are kind of like shaped in that way.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to, you know, be as inclusive as possible and make as many things as possible. So
That's very
we
cool.
will see what
Yeah.
appears.
You have to keep me posted on that. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Um, and where can people find you on social media if they want to follow, make sure that they know all of this cool stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so all my socials are linked on Paint.gay as well, but my main handle that I use is I am on Instagram as Queer Renaissance,
Okay.
because my sister said when she first saw my Platel tarot art that it made her feel like a renaissance. And I kind of
Okay.
like Renaissance is kind of like this idea of like, you know, post destruction, post
Yeah.
maybe chaos, where we are creating something beautiful. We
Yeah.
are
I feel like
creating
transformation.
yeah, we're creating a new world through art
That is very
and through what
cool.
we do. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yes, definitely. It was a pleasure.
That was such a great interview. Paint's really cool person. So make sure that you check out the links down below in the description where, we always post them so you can easily follow every guest that we have on this show. Gotta support each other. As well, make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button so that you get all the notifications about new episodes for the show. And we do have a merch store. 10% of the proceeds go back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. So if you haven't already become a patron on the Patreon page, if you want to support, that's just one more way that you can do it. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly.